Good afternoon, everybody. I normally do these on Thursday. It's only Wednesday, but I tell you, it feels like it's been quite a week already. I attended President Trump's inauguration on Monday, frankly, to show support for a peaceful transfer of power. It was even I was a bit surprised, though, when I saw some of the wealthiest people in the world lined up, having better seats than anyone that was proposed by Mr. Trump for his cabinet. So the wealthy folks first, then the cabinet, and to the extent that folks like Republican governors, including our governor, were in the overflow room rather than where the inauguration took place. And listen, I celebrate success in America. I'm proud of my own business success. But there was a bit unsettling, to say the least, that you had the wealthiest people in the world so prominently positioned. And what kind of signal does that send to the American public, who I think at the end of the day elected Mr. Trump because they thought he was going to cut grocery prices and find ways to make America stronger. I was, in the speech itself, there was, sounded to me like more of a campaign speech. I wish we would have seen even a small gesture of grace, for example, to President Biden on the work that was done jointly, for example, on bringing about a ceasefire in Gaza and starting the release of the hostages that have been so brutally taken by Hamas. We know we've gone from that action on Monday to then a huge flurry of executive actions. One of the most prominent was his unconditional pardoning of the rioters who assaulted police officers and took over the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. 2021. That speaks volumes in terms of Trump's respect for law officers. I mean, I think he says he wants to be tough on crime, and one of his first actions is to pardon people who physically assaulted police officers and assaulted our Capitol. And remember, I think there were 5 deaths directly related to that tragedy. Most of them were Virginians. We also saw a flurry of other executive actions. Some things just plain unconstitutional. The idea that he can write away part of the Constitution by eliminating birthright citizenship. You don't show respect for the Constitution by thinking that a presidential executive order can somehow override what the founders put in place. There's so much action. I feel like he's a little bit flooding the zone to maybe take the eyes off of some of these horribly unqualified nominees. But we're going to have to sort through all of this. And I want to work. Listen, I want to work with President Trump. I want him to be successful. He is the president of the United States, and if he's successful and America's successful, I'm all for it. I've already voted for a couple of his nominees, but where there are people that are clearly unqualified or clearly have interests that I think are adverse to our country and to Virginia, I'm going to stand up. One of those individuals I had a chance to question this morning in the Budget Committee, Russell Vought, who is President's nominee for OMB. This is a man who, his resume looks like it reads right out of a description of somebody that comes using Republican terminology from the swamp. This guy has never managed anything. He's not run a business, no private sector experience, worked on Capitol Hill, worked as a bureaucrat, worked as a right-wing think tank. But what it's a little curious that for draining the swamp, that does not seem like a drain the swamp kind of guy. But what concerns me more, and I think is the thing that is dispositive to me, it's not his background, is the fact that he literally used terms such as he would hope that all federal workers would be traumatized. They need to feel the trauma. They're villains. He seems to measure success by how many people he can make quit the federal government. And again, this was the guy that was deeply involved in the Project 2025. In that missive, laid out ideas to try to break up the intelligence community. I tell you, as somebody who's worked so closely with the intelligence community as chairman of the committee and long-serving member, it would weaken America's national security if we were to somehow take the CIA and break it up and put it all over the country. There is value and efficiency involved by having, for example, all of our intelligence agencies close together in the greater capital region. In my mind, that kind of mismanagement approach means that I will not be supporting him on that, in terms of his willingness to break up the intelligence committee, in terms of his willingness to, frankly, politicize all federal employees with the so-called Schedule F effort. We created the civil service in the first place to make sure that government service was not going to be political. It was going to be protected. It could be independent. And Mr. Vogt, unfortunately, represents a complete reversal on those issues, as well as my good friend Tim Kaine followed afterwards. He uses some of the language that Mr. Vogt uses about, weaponized governments and woke government. And as Tim Kaine said, what is woke or weaponized government in terms of assistance to kids, in terms of food stamps, for example. So clearly, Mr. Vogt will be one in a number of nominees that I will strongly oppose. I have supported two of Mr. Trump's nominees so far, John Radcliffe for the director of CIA, and I believe he will be confirmed tomorrow. Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary. I was not totally pleased with his hearing presentation, but I do think he has the financial background skills to be an able Treasury Secretary. And finally, I just want to touch on immigration. I voted to support the Laken-Riley Act. I wish it had been further amended, but the notional idea that if you violate the law and you are in this country illegally, that could and should lead to deportation, is a theory that makes sense. Frankly, it's already partially enshrined in law. But let me be clear, that does not mean that I'm going to end or stop my career-long support for legal immigration and for the contribution that immigrants make to Virginia, to our country. It means I'm not going to support getting rid of temporary protective status for our Salvadoran community or our Sudanese community, where I've been working very closely to try to end that conflict in Sudan, or others who've come here under legal programs that are not yet fully citizens, but are here legally. And if Mr. Trump or his actions start doing these mass deportations that have with no regard to the law, I will stand firmly opposed against that. But it's, again, I'll close with where I opened. I want Donald Trump to be successful. But to meet, what I hope he will understand is he's got to meet people halfway. That's not been his approach in the past. But I want, this is a second Trump presidency. I want to give him an initial benefit of the doubt, but I am deeply, deeply concerned about the volume and tenor of these executive orders that he's launched, and in particular, the notion of pardoning individuals who've assaulted police officers in the riot on January 6, 2021. With that, why don't I turn it over to Laura and be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for confirming that it is only Wednesday. Just kidding. At any rate, I wanted to jump into more about the federal workers. I know everybody is kind of sorting through what these executive orders mean, but there's been a lot of consternation, as you know, among federal workers about whether or not telework is being almost eliminated unless there's some exceptions. I wonder if you could just talk about what you are going to be doing moving forward in terms of trying to protect federal employees and in connection with various actions that have already been put down.
Let me go through this, Mitchell, in a couple of places. I have supported a return to work policy. I've agreed, frankly, with Mayor Bowser on this. We need to get federal employees back to work in offices. Not criticizing remote work, but I think the expectation of being in the office is something that makes sense. But I also believe, if we go back to the pre-COVID policies, there are a number of jobs where telework made sense. I mean, matter of fact, the champion for telework for many, many years in Congress was Frank Wolf, a Republican member from Northern Virginia. So, my hope is in the return to work that there will still be, legitimate telework exemptions, but the kind of broad-based approach right now where people can only show up in some areas, one day in the office for every pay period, I think is too far on the other end. In terms of the kind of treatment, why I'm going to not support Mr. Vogt, the idea that it is a good idea to try to get federal workers to quit or to put them in trauma. I was a business guy. That would be malpractice in management if you're trying to intimidate and traumatize your workforce. And so I've got legislation along with Jerry Connolly and Tim and a number of the Virginia delegation to make sure that you don't politicize the workforce with this Schedule F effort. So I'm going to stand up against any effort to get rid of the civil service protections for federal workers. I am waiting with some anticipation on what the so-called DOGE effort that now I guess is simply led by Elon Musk. If there are ways to bring efficiency to our government, count me in. One of the things I was proudest of when I was governor was Virginia got named best managed state. And we found a host of ways to leverage our purchasing power, to cut back on our auto fleet, to try to bring smoother operations. There's plenty of areas in the federal government where we can find greater efficiency. But that starts by actually respecting your workforce and not demonizing them. And so far, we've seen from Trump and from some of his potential appointees this notion of demonizing the federal workforce. That is, maybe a political soundbite for some, but that is, I can tell you as a former governor, as a former business guy, that's not the way you make your workforce the most effective. Reform, count me in. Wholesale attack on federal workers, politicizing our workforce, eliminating any flexibility in the workforce, I will stand strongly against.
Senator, our next question will be Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5.
Senator, good afternoon. Thanks for doing the call. There was a directive sent out by the Trump Justice Department last night by Emil Bove, who's the acting Deputy Attorney General, directing the Justice Department and its federal prosecutors to investigate any state or local officials who, quote, stand in the way of beefed-up enforcement on immigration laws. There are some jurisdictions in Virginia, as you know, Fairfax County, the city of Alexandria, and Arlington County, which had come under the microscope during the first Trump administration. Are you concerned that this DOJ now is going to once again turn tail on these Northern Virginia jurisdictions if they don't go along with what the ICE wants to do?
Yeah, I am concerned about that. And one of the reasons why I think law enforcement itself took these positions a number of years back was because law enforcement does its job best when it works with the community. And if anybody of Hispanic heritage, citizen, green card holder, or not, suddenly fears that any police officer it could potentially detain them or deport them, then you don't drive crime down. You break off all kinds of relationship between law enforcement and immigrant communities. So, I want to talk again with both the prosecuting and Commonwealth attorneys in some of those jurisdictions. I want to talk again with law enforcement to get their views on this. But again, this is an example of kind of a sledgehammer approach as opposed to a scalpel. If President Trump simply does what at least some of his folks say, which is, if you are here illegally, undocumented, and you commit a crime, then you should be deported. I think, one, that's already law, but two, I'm supportive of those policies. But the idea of turning every local cop or sheriff's deputy into an immigration enforcement officer, I think that would actually really undermine their top priority, which is keeping our community safe.
Senator, our next question is Luca Powell with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Hi, Senator. 87 Siemens, by count, got clemency on Monday for the January 6th riot, including a number of defendants who were convicted of violently assaulting cops. And we know we're following several of them who were halfway through serving their time in federal prisons, but they obviously are not going to end up serving that because they were released on Tuesday. So the rest have also had their cases dropped. Can you talk a little bit more about what you make of the pardons that went out on Monday?
I think at the end, particularly with his family members, President Biden overused his pardon ability. This has been, pardons by presidents in the past have been used selectively, targeted, and on an individual basis. This across-the-board pardon of rioters, regardless of how violently they assaulted police officers, is irresponsible. It sends an awful signal about respect for rule of law. It also, frankly, for those individuals on the far right who think, and the militia groups that are out there, that we've seen threats against elected officials increase dramatically. What signal does that send? That if you can assault a cop and not have to serve time because Donald Trump will have your back as long as you're a political supporter, what does that say to more violent extremists, particularly on the right, but on either end of the political agenda, about a warning in terms of what consequences they'll face? It sounds to me like the underlying message is, if you got Donald Trump's back, he's going to have your back regardless of what you do. That is something that should concern all of us, no matter who we supported for president.
Senator, our next question is Margaret Barthel with WAMU.
Hi, thank you, Senator. I want to go back to federal workers for a moment. It's been such a deluge of executive actions in the last 48 hours, kind of relating to people's jobs. And I guess I wonder, if there are any sort of specific, frequently asked questions that your office has been hearing from, just people confused about, kind of what to expect when they go into work.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my hope is working with the balance of the Virginia delegation, because we think about federal workers in Northern Virginia, but we got a ton of federal workers down in Hampton Roads as well. We also have a huge number of contractors, and while the venom has been approached at federal workers, there's also been kind of ad hominem attacks against contractors as well. We're trying to get those answers as quickly as possible. It is my hope before the end of the week that we can have, better guidance. But there were so many of these executive orders, and so many of them will obviously be contested in court. But this puts, what's so concerning to me is that this is exactly what the guy I questioned today, Russell Vought, who wants to be the head of OMB, and remember, that's budget and management, and using his own words that he wants to do as much as possible to chase people away from the federal workplace, to put trauma and have federal workers feel trauma. They're feeling trauma right now. And if we look at their past actions, I pointed out to him, last Trump administration, they moved the headquarters of Bureau of Land Management out of our region. The number of vacancies went up 170%, and the General Accounting Office, the kind of independent auditor, said it dramatically degraded the service. This kind of action that seems more on a political vendetta as opposed to efficiency, this flies in the face of efficiency. You want to have a federal workforce that's ready to go to work, that works hard, that is held accountable. Count me in on the accountability piece. And if there's ways to make it more efficient, particularly using technology, I'm wide open to that. But unduly bringing trauma, Mr. Vought's own words, to the federal workforce is, again, management malpractice in terms of how you operate. I say that as a former business owner.
Senator, our next question is Atra El-Nashar with Sinclair.
Hey, Senator. Speaking of politicizing federal workers, your thoughts on the DEIA, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Accessibility executive order the president put out. Do you think it's legal? Do you think the federal workers affected by it might have some legal recourse, especially if they're laid off?
Yeah, I do believe, obviously, they have not been able to change the law in terms of civil service protections. Whether there are if somebody who was serving as a DEI officer has the ability to be terminated simply because of the nature of their job, truthfully, I need to check that out in terms of what rights. I think you still have some appeal rights, but I want to. That's a fair question, and I want to check it out. And I think about this, and again, an area that I spend a lot of time on in terms of national security and our intelligence community. I don't care what you call some of these programs, but to have programs that our workforce actually looks like America, I think means you're going to have a better level of service. Or one of the things that I've spent a lot of time with folks at the CIA, the fact that if we have spies in Africa or Latin America or in Asia, they ought to look like the populations where they're working. I don't care what you call that. I call that good spy practice. I call that good, intelligence hygiene. And I just so worry that under this kind of these kind of actions, there may have been times where these programs went overboard, but to throw it all out and to somehow go back to a workforce that's simply made up of a bunch of folks that look like me, I'm not sure that's in the best interest of our country. I know it's not in the best interest of our country.
Senator, our next question is Kelsey Childress with WSET.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking the time. I had a question about some recent stolen EBT benefits in the Lynchburg and surrounding areas in particular. Now, currently, there's no bill or program that will refund those stolen stamps because it ended back in December. So now a lot of people are left with nothing for the month of January, and I know that's been hard for a lot of families that I've spoken to. Is there anything being done on Capitol Hill or that you're working on to help these people that are facing that fraud?
Yeah, these were folks that had their... And were you saying their food stamp benefits stolen? And tell me again.
Yes, their food stamp benefits, yes.
I honestly have not heard about that, but I can assure you I will get on this right afterwards and see if there's any remedy. Because if people, again, this very program we're talking about. The guy this morning in one of his writings called that weaponized government and woke programs, getting people that don't have resources, the ability to feed their kids. I don't call that woke. I call that basic humanity. And I know there have been other incidents where food stamps have been stolen. Let me check and see on what kind of remedies we can look at. And so let me get some more information. But I have not. That's not been brought to my attention yet. But I'll get on it today.
Our next question is Coulter Amstead with WTKR.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking time to talk with us. I've got a question about that I've come up from a lot of military families here in Hampton Roads regarding the company that has ultimately, I guess, Congress worked to contract with a company called HomeSafe that now handles all of the PCS moves. A lot of military families are saying that they're very unhappy with the contract and the company, the service that the company is providing, and they would like Congress to look into this company and the contract that has been awarded and to have this company handle the move. I was wondering if you had heard any concerns from any military families across Virginia, and if you had heard, what you might think about their concerns, and then would you be open to an investigation into this company?
First of all, I have heard about this, I believe, from the media. We've not seen a dramatic uptick in casework because oftentimes military families will contact our office when they have these issues. But I am candidly not surprised. This issue of military housing, I jumped on in 2014 when particularly sailors down in Norfolk were living in homes that had huge amounts of black mold and other health hazards. We had to shame the private sector company into improving its behavior. It got better for a couple of years. Then this broke out again in the last 5 or 6 years. These private contracts that we give out, whether it's on movement of service members or housing service members, they do not have strict enough oversight, and we don't hold them accountable enough. And on the housing contracts, they literally were some of them for 30 plus years. In terms of this moving company, we are working now on demanding answers, and when we make that communication with the company, we'll be sure to let you know. But yes, this is something that we are looking into, and I expect to be acting on literally in the coming days.
Senator, our next question is Doug Boynton with WHRO. Doug? Okay, we're going to move on to Raven Brown with WWBT.
Hey, Senator. I know you got a lot of questions about these federal employees. So some of my questions were asked. I kind of want to just ask again about this executive order. We know that a lot of people, moved to Richmond, Virginia from northern Virginia to be able to work remotely. I just want to get your thoughts on the local impact that this could bring to the economy. Say that they do decide to resign, or they have to go back, or some of them may have kids in school here in Richmond and whatnot.
Well, listen, I think Richmond. I had the opportunity to live there back when I was governor. Richmond is a great city. It is a hot city in terms of how it's viewed around the country. It ranks so high on quality of life, and not just Richmond, but the surrounding counties, suburban counties. I think New Kent, for example, may be the fastest growing county in Virginia at this point. I do feel like the idea that the kind of COVID work schedule was going to last forever was probably not feasible. I do believe that there is value in working in the office that sometimes you can't measure in terms of actually, especially for younger employees, to learn and be part of a culture. But it ought to be done with some level of flexibility. I hope people wouldn't leave federal government employee, but there are obviously I think a lot of job opportunities open in the greater Richmond market. But at the same time, I think, I've known folks that have made that commute for years, long before we had this remote work process. My hope and belief is that the ability to do that commute is actually going to improve dramatically as we construct what's called Long Bridge from the district to Virginia that will double the amount of rail capacity coming into Virginia. The ability to get on a regular, convenient, and fast train from Richmond that could get you to D.C. quickly could be the best of both worlds. I mean, you could end up still having the benefits of living in the Richmond region, but hopefully in a commute that's feasible. But that is one of the outgrowths of the infrastructure bill. And frankly, that $700 million plus project that on this bridge is one of the biggest achievements we got for Virginia out of the infrastructure bill so far. So that increased rail will help. But this will probably take a few days to sort out. And it goes back to my first answer, though, which is, for a long time we promoted some level of telework, as long as it didn't, as long as it was in certain areas and it didn't degrade the quality of the output. I do worry that we may have, during COVID, where we went so much the other way, bringing it back to a kind of pre-COVID balance makes sense. At the end of the day, that doesn't mean, as I said, getting rid of all the pre-COVID telework policies. I do think you have to make the case and show that you can still be as effective. And that's what I'm fearful, that in the effort to kind of get a headline, that any kind of nuance or any kind of non-sledgehammer approach to a lot of these issues, I think is not going to work. And again, the focus on these activities, where's President Trump's effort to try to lower grocery prices, to bring down inflation? I don't think we've heard barely a word on those subjects. We've heard more about renaming bodies of water or trying to take over other countries, or some of these efforts going against our federal workers. I don't believe that's what Virginians expected, whether they voted for Trump or didn't vote for Trump.
Senator, our next question is Tom Brewer with WFXR.
Good afternoon, Senator Warner. I just wanted reaction now that the bill you sponsored has taken effect. It's about the renaming of the Poff Federal Building in Roanoke to the Reuben E. Lawson Federal Building.
Listen, I'm very proud that we led effort, Tim Kaine and I, at the request of the community, to rename the federal building for Reuben Lawson, who is a civil rights lawyer, was frankly from Roanoke, led the effort to desegregate a number of accommodations in Southwest Virginia and Western Virginia. He died very young, and I'm proud that the building was renamed, and I'm grateful for my Republican congresspeople from Virginia as well, Ben Klein and Morgan Griffith, who ended up helping us get that legislation through. I think we're coming up on Black History Month, and we're in Black History Month, so I think telling the full story of Virginia, the good, the bad, the ugly, and recognizing people like Reuben Lawson that might not have been a household name is part of a 21st century Virginia.
Senator, our next question is Avery Davis with WVIR.
Hello, Senator. Talking again about kind of the flurry of executive orders, you covered a lot of what I was going to ask, but one thing I wanted to get your reaction on was I know that Trump did name MS-13 and several other cartels as terrorist organizations. From an intelligence perspective, I wanted to hear your reaction to that. Thank you.
We, in terms of naming these drug cartels as terrorist organizations, being able to bring fuller power against them, I'm supportive of. And I go back again, these drugs are not coming, for the most part, over actually on undocumented individuals. They're coming through our ports of entry. And I really think the bipartisan immigration bill we had last year would have made sure that those ports of entry had much better protections. I also think we need to continue to hold China accountable. The precursor chemicals that go into fentanyl still come, in many cases, from China. And so the ability to bring further resources, I can tell you, particularly in the realm that I have a lot of oversight, the intelligence community, we understand, the intelligence community understands, the power of these drug organizations to not only destabilize Mexico or potentially destabilize Central America, but this is an assault on America. And bringing our full resources to bear, I think, is the right move.
Senator, our next question is Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Michael?
Good afternoon, Senator. I had to unmute my phone. I appreciate you taking all these questions about the federal workforce, which is what I'm focusing on, too. Governor Youngkin's office says that he had sent quotes out that he basically supports what the president is doing with these executive orders. Obviously, he had strongly supported back to the offices for a long time, but he also says Schedule F simply reinstates and reenacts the old executive order. Do you feel like that Governor Youngkin is going to work with Democrats in Congress to protect the federal workforce in Virginia, given the stakes for the economy?
Listen, I've had a very strong working relationship with Governor Youngkin, and particularly on economic development. We've worked on a lot of projects together, and we worked very closely together to make sure that Virginia got the kind of emergency relief that we deserved after Hurricane Helene, and we were very successful there. On this one, I just disagree with the governor. I think the federal workforce is a critical part of our economy. These are folks that are well-educated, well-trained. I think do their job well. Matter of fact, if you look at the number of federal workers all in today, it's about the same number as it was in the 50s and 60s. The federal workforce has not expanded at any dramatic rate with the growth of our economy, or frankly, our population growth. If there are ways to be more efficient, again, count me in. That's why I'm not going to, criticize the DOGE effort until I see what they've got, and I'm willing to work with them. I've even had contact with some of the leadership there. But the federal workforce and then the contractor workforce as well, are what not only keep our economy strong, but we disproportionately have federal workers that are involved in the defense area. We have contractors involved in the defense area. Willy-nilly cuts to those individuals, or trying to bring trauma. Again, not my words. The potential OMB director's words. He wants to traumatize and bring trauma to the federal workforce, and he wants them, in effect, not to go to work so they'll quit. That's not good management, and that's sure as heck not good for Virginia. And in terms of trying to get a workforce that's going to be more productive, I've run enough businesses to know that you don't demonize your workforce if you want to get more production from them.
Senator, our next question is Evelyn Mejia with the Prince William Times.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much again for taking this call. I wanted to talk a little bit about the concerns that some school divisions are having across Virginia, and wanted to know what you are hearing from school divisions about concerns with students and staff.
I'm sorry, could you say that from?
Yeah, I wanted to know what you're hearing from Virginia school divisions about any concerns with their students and staff with potential federal law enforcement showing up at their steps.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I understand now. This is a challenge we've been struggling with for a long time in Virginia, and it's one of the reasons why we do need a tighter border. And I do think one of the areas I was quite critical of President Biden on, the border was too open for too long. But the notional idea that you were to have kids at schools, documented or not, that somehow might be singled out just because of their ethnic heritage or what they look like or the color of their skin, or the idea that you would have local law enforcement potentially coming to raid schools, that just goes way too far. And let's tighten up the border. If people are here undocumented and they've committed a crime and been convicted of that crime, there ought to be a deportation process. But the idea that you're going to simply spread fear across communities, and one of the communities that I think a lot about, and disproportionately in Northern Virginia, but it's the El Salvadoran community. We've had folks from El Salvador in large numbers in our region going back to the early 90s when there was a brutal civil war there. They have been in our country for many of them for 25 to 30 years. They're deeply ingrained and a valuable part of the community. Most all of them have kids that have been born here, or so the idea that they are suddenly thrown into this level of trauma and fear, I'm going to do everything possible to make sure that we keep schools safe and not places that are subject to any kind of raids that are not appropriate or not about law breaking.
Right.
I'm sorry, we have to move on. We have to move on. We have quite a few questions today. Our next question is Jory Heckman with the Federal News Network.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for taking my question. I wanted to ask you about the government-wide hiring freeze. There are a couple of carve-outs there for defense, for immigration, for a couple other things, veterans benefits, but some of your colleagues have raised concerns that there aren't enough carve-outs for things like VA healthcare. What are your concerns about that hiring freeze going forward?
Again, I have not reviewed all the carve-outs yet, but this is where, again, a perfect example of where you come in with a blanket policy without any nuance. Do we really, if we've got shortages in air traffic controllers, do you really want to say we don't want to hire more air traffic controllers? Or if we've got shortages in food inspectors, or, we've got an incredible new facility that's going to be open in the Fredericksburg area very shortly. We've been working on for years of a new VA hospital and facility. It's going to be world class. But I know they're still in the process of hiring up their staff. And you're going to suddenly say something that we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, and I've been working on personally for 6 or 7 years, that they can't get fully staffed to open. And, so again, maybe there's that exemption for a new facility. But if there's not, this is the kind of inefficiency, and this is the kind of, mismanagement that, going for a political headline rather than going for how we make our government more efficient, they're hit total loggerheads. And so I'm going to be anxious to take a look at what carve-outs there have been. But I can think about all these categories, but I'm thinking particularly about the new VA medical facility around Fredericksburg. We've been working on that for years. And wouldn't it be a shame that the veterans in that region, where the veterans population is growing so fast, can't get an appointment because of this hiring freeze? That would be, again, gross mismanagement from the federal level.
Senator, our next question is John Fredericks with the John Fredericks Radio Show. John? Okay, we're going to move on to our last question of Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. This one's going to be kind of hard, so gear up. The Puppy Bowl participants are ready to play, and there are Virginia representatives on each team. For example, there's Abigail from Operation Pause for Homes in Alexandria on Team Fluff, and Demure from Green Dogs Unleashed in Troy on Team Rough. Now, I know it's a tough choice each year, but can you give us any insight about what's going into your decision and any indication of whether you're pulling for Team Rough or Team Fluff?
Amy, I'm going to, since we got Virginia puppies on both sides, I'm going to, take a little bit of a pass. Now, I will say I'm obviously for the Commanders in the NFC Championship game, but I'll make a commitment to do my research and come down on Team rough or fluff before Super Bowl day. And and the fact that you're way ahead of me on this, are any of those Virginia participants Virginia Beagles? Because I'm particularly partial. Last year, I think, or the last couple of years, we've had Beagles that we actually helped free from Envigo, that awful animal testing facility where these Beagles were so abused. So before I do my research, if one of them happens to be a Beagle from Envigo, I'll probably go on that team. But as always, you stumped me more than most folks, Amy.
That was our final question.
And again, if John Fredericks, I want to make sure if John's still on. We've agreed to disagree on over a lot of things, but I don't want him. I know you called him out, but if John's still on, I'd be happy to take his question or comment. I guess not. Well,
I don't believe we have him.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. One thing I can assure you all is I don't think we're going to lack for content on these sessions going forward. Thanks.